Hi, international trade. I am home in Georgia, and no one in my family would listen to this, so I had to choose my arthritic dog, which is kind of sad and uncomfortable for you to watch. But she has arthritis, so shouldn't be able to move away. So Gracie, I'm going to school you a thing or two about how to measure job loss from trade. So we know that gains from trade are well established and understood, not by me per se, but by others. But what is less well known, however, are losses from trade, in particular job loss. And to be able better to understand job loss, we need to measure it, we need to quantify it. And presently there are three approaches. All are imperfect and some are better than others, but I'm going to teach you all three regardless. So, to better understand each approach, I've divided each between the framework for measurement of job loss and then the actual measurement of job loss. So the first one is the trade deficit approach. Okay, so the framework for measurement in this one is to determine the employment that one industry is responsible for by distinguishing between the direct employment requirement, how many jobs the industry is directly responsible for, and the indirect employment requirement, how many jobs the industry is indirectly responsible for. Like the beverage industry, not directly employing farmers, but supporting them through buying their products, maybe. So before we do anything, we determine the number of American jobs directly supported by an industry per $1 million of output in that industry, and we determine the number of jobs indirectly supported by an industry per $1 million of output in that industry. A number which is a huge sum of all the other industries in the US and the number of jobs that are indirectly supported by another industry in there. So, now that we have the framework, the actual measurement is that we multiply the direct employment requirement, the number of jobs supported directly by that industry, per $1 million in industry out. Oh my god. It's literally a miracle. She hasn't moved all day, so look at how lonely I am. I'm going to continue though. Where was I? Okay. So now that we have the framework, the actual measurement is that we multiply the direct employment requirement, which is, I'm reiterating, the number of jobs supported directly by that industry per $1 million in output, by the trade deficit, which will be in millions. And then we multiply the indirect employment requirement, the number of jobs supported indirectly by that industry per $1 million in industry output, by the trade deficit in that industry, again in millions. So we add those two numbers, the direct employment requirement times the trade deficit, and the indirect employment requirement times the trade deficit to get a number of how many jobs lost. Now, as you may have thought, there are problems with this, and mathematically it gives us an exaggerated job loss by one, overestimating the indirect labor requirement, which gets complicated in the global supply chain, and then also overestimating the actual trade deficit because the method doesn't factor in services, which the US usually has a surplus of in trade. And the method assumes that we would have produced anything that we hadn't imported, which isn't true because those cheaper imports created greater demand, a greater market for something. And it also gives us an exaggerated job loss relatedly because the trade deficit approach confuses economic growth with import competition. So when the economy grows, imports grow, and the trade deficit within that industry can grow even when the economy is growing as a whole and no jobs are being lost. But the second approach corrects for that, and the second approach is the Kletzler direct approach, which is slightly better. So the framework for measurement in this approach that you will see corrects for some of the problems in the last one is that you identify vulnerable industries that are vulnerable to import competition and compete with imports in a domestic market. So to do this, you do not look at industries where imports grew, because more imports could just mean more economic growth as a whole. So to do this, you look at industries where the import share of products within an industry rose. That is, the share of imported goods in a market versus the share of domestic goods within a market. And this is important because it corrects for a mistake in the trade deficit approach. Because the trade deficit approach considers more imports, which could be because of a greater economy, as something contributing to the trade deficit. So now that we have the framework for this measurement, where we identify vulnerable industries, we calculate the actual measurement by using the displaced worker survey to tally up how many jobs were lost in that industry that was vulnerable to import competition. Okay, almost done. So a third approach, which isn't even good, it is bad, is to count those who qualified for and are receiving trade adjustment assistance. And this leaves a lot of room for criticism because a lot of people, like me, don't know what that is. So, so they wouldn't have applied for assistance even if they had qualified it. And then there are the actual barriers to applying. 5% of workers within an industry must be affected. You must prove your job was lost as a direct result of trade and import competition. And there's a 2-month delay between applying and getting assistance, all the while you're jobless and need to be doing other things. And plus, many older workers whose jobs were displaced just retire. So, in summary, the Klutzler approach is probably the best one because it doesn't confuse greater importation with job loss. But still, there's no current method to measure services offshoring and the trade deficit, or in the American case, the trade surplus from within services. And economic scholarship has not yet provided a method for doing so, as Klutzler just did. So if you're like one of those TAs and want to leave a mark on the world, that could be one. Okay, bye international trade.